example of looking
Yeah.
at the business side of it and being just very
Something
practical.
else, which is, yeah, I'd like to state that there's something else which is a suitable analogy for anybody listening. She doesn't overwork. Uh, she could get carried away in an awful lot of detail in her images and spend way too much time at that. And the reason why I say she doesn't do it is she recognizes that at what point she satisfies her clientele, if you want to call it a clientele, her market, if you want to be brutal and speak in business terms, it's her market. People are happy with the way they see her images. If you want to sort of take it out as a parallel and apply it against the music industry, how many people we see who are overdoing what they need to do in order to be entertaining, because anything beyond being entertaining in the music industry is for your own benefit. You might as well sit home in your bedroom or your lounge or your den and overplay there for all the good that it will do you out in the marketplace. If you can play licks at 1,000 miles an hour on your guitar, that's great. But very quickly, it's going to become boring for most people watching. Do you see what I'm driving at?
I absolutely see, and I understand completely, and I can, and that is a really good analogy. And as someone who is a huge consumer of music, who and entertainment in general, whether it's theater or books, or for me, if you're up on stage and you're playing all these, you could be doing all sorts of complicated guitar things and piano things, and I can appreciate it to a degree, but if you're really really entertaining, that's what I'm there for. that's that's the
Yeah,
reason I'm
that's
there, is to be entertained. That doesn't mean there isn't some you know artistic value and strength, and that's all I'm taking away is just a
oh,
good time. You,
I think the value in being entertaining is equal to, if not greater than, being a great artist, musician, singer. I honestly think that it's a far greater challenge to incorporate whatever it is you are gifted with, you are talented with. Gifted is a nice word, because it suggests maybe it comes from some place we don't understand, and that's why I like to use that word. But it's easy to see how that if you're not entertaining when you're doing that, then it's going to leave people, and you have no chance whatsoever to be either memorable or in people's interest or in their kind of viewpoint when they want to spend a bit of money. You have to come back and remember that it's a kind of a cruel thing, but you have to make a livelihood out of this. Now, if you don't mind carrying your abilities back for your private entertainment, and maybe you exercise those things in venues where you don't need to make money, like maybe you sing really well in church, or maybe you do really bang up jobs on pop songs, and you're going to entertain some kids in the afternoon in school, but you don't really need to carry it any further. If you're not interested in carrying it any further, if you don't need to carry it any further, you don't need to make money, you can maybe leave it at that. Nobody really minds. And you might be fulfilled as an artist. So I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with that. It's just when you suggest what is the difference between people who are so successful at what they do versus those who are not, it usually comes down to how much public interest there is in what they're doing.
yes.
And that's what we're trying to nail, is especially in Bonny Wassisname and the other fellows. I mean, we kind of hit the stride there of making that undulating wave of emotion from the kind of the highs that ticklish tunes or high comedy can give you, and then swing you down into something very emotional again with either Ray's recitation or Wayne's serious ballads, and it's a seesaw. And so for the whole program, you're trying to stretch people's emotional range from tears to laughter, And if you do that successfully, it becomes very memorable for people. I've seen countless entertainers that I will only ever bother to go see once, because they don't do much for me emotionally. I think we all want to be touched emotionally. And if you're a solo artist, it's very much more challenging, because I know from being a solo artist for 3 to 4 years that it's the devil's own work to try and be all things to all people. You're never going to be able to please all people anyway, as an entertainer. You're always going to find people who are disinterested in you, or will even disparage you publicly and privately. You have no chance of reaching everybody. But it's trying to reach the greatest number of people, I often ask, what is the greatest joke in the world? And people will try and think of a joke. And I will simply reply that it must be the one that makes the most people laugh. And I think that's a very obvious comment in the way, what is the best song in the world? Well, the best song in the world must be the song which makes the most people sing along and is remembered by the most people, It's that sort of thing.
I think
you're not going to get everybody.
No, and I think and as you say, you want to reach the most people, and I think I always call it cracking the code. So you're finding the balance between what you enjoy doing, what the audience enjoys and will be impacted by, and making a living at it. And so you have all these things sort of, creating this sort of tension where you have to start really saying, okay, I write books. So, I mean, if I write a book and people give me the feedback that they didn't particularly care for it, I'm not going to write that kind of book anymore, maybe. If a lot of people do, one bad review I won't pay attention to. It's about the books that become the most successful are the ones that appeal to the most people. The records that sell the most appeal to a lot of people. That doesn't mean that I like everything that appeals to a lot of people. There's always exceptions, and people have their own various tastes, and there's a lot of people in the world. So, I mean, there's a lot of potential out there to find an audience. But you have to crack that code. Where's my spot? Where do I fit? Now, who's my audience? Who's my market? And what do I like doing? I don't believe anybody should hate what they're doing, even if it does, you know, bring them some sort of commercial success. If they really don't enjoy it and they're not doing what feels, true to them, that's a whole other thing. But finding that balance and cracking that code and, finding your audience and then expanding it and taking the opportunities that show up. I was reading a thing today and they said people have opportunities all the time. They just don't know how to recognize them. They don't know how to say yes. And sometimes they don't know how to say no to the ones that aren't going to be that helpful. So it really is. It sounds complicated. And it's not. Yeah. And there's no overnight success. I think sometimes overnight recognition happens, like if you have a YouTube sensation, but overnight success where it has staying power, and you've cracked the code. You're happy doing it. You're like a band like Bon Jovi who has all the other bands broke up and they kept going, and I'm sure that they had similar idea where they found that balance. And of course, like you said, that in this province, the talent, I mean, I know there's a lot of talent everywhere, but in this province, the talent is definitely not the issue.
No, never has been. That's extraordinary.
It's astounding how many people have artistic and creative talent, and that is above the normal. I think all humans have some. But it just seems like I think I found another one. I think there's only 2 of us in the province who can't sing. That's it, me and one other person. But it really is amazing the talent. So when you have so many people with that much talent, it really does make a difference how hard you work and how well you work and your mindset.
It's unnerving as a musician when you're, or even as a singer or entertainer of any sort, when you know a good portion of your audience is at least as good as you are on your instrument. And then beyond that, what do do you have, but it's indicative of something, I suppose, that they come out to see it. I should like to revisit my early history, and this might be of interest to anybody. So when I was 18, I started at that time, and it was the early 70s. We used to entertain in nightclubs. Now, I was underage at that time. I was only 18, and the legal age then had been 21. But so if you had what they called a sponsor, you could entertain in a place like a lounge. And so I had a brother-in-law who was 3 or 4 years older than me. There was no trouble. So we formed a band. There was 3 of us. And then quickly we assimilated with 3 other musicians. And so then we were a band of 6. And from 1974 then, when we got those other 2 people, 74 to, or really 73 to 76, we got around and buying one thing and another, like a van and then a bus, a new set of drums for each drummer who decided to come and go, guitar amplifiers for everybody who needed guitar amplifiers. And the trouble is we weren't making any money. So anything that we made, we're putting directly into kind of funding the chattels, which went along with this, never ever thinking to ourselves, we need to pay ourselves. I remember one time we were all starved to death, and so we had to go and cook a ham and a turkey and sort of share it out so we could all survive another week, We got paid one year in 1976, February of 1976. We got paid $18 a piece. That was the only time we ever got paid. And that was the rock band experience. And we ended up, myself and the guitarist, with the bus at the end of it, which we had to sell. And we sold it to a fellow whose name was Johnny Green and the Green Men. Johnny Green, and the Greenmen were his band. Now, these were guys who clearly knew what they were doing. They were out of the U.S., in Cincinnati, I think. But Johnny Green and the Greenmen were known at the time for doing the theme song to the first Batman, the TV Batman series, right? Wow. That song, so anyway, that's how they became sort of known. But they were able to tour the whole continent on that. And so they all dyed their hair this luminescent green. It started with bleaching it blonde and then dyeing it green. So they were noted for going around with green hair. The only people in the world going around with neon green hair, And that was absurd enough. But in 1976, when I met him, Johnny Green was the consummate businessman. He was playing morning socials at seniors' homes and then playing afternoon teas or churches or schools for matinees. In the evenings, he was doing lounges and he was doing dances wherever he could, and he was always traveling. But he was also buying and selling things. He would sell big things. He would sell things like chattels. And he would... Yes.
Call dropped.
Still there?
Yep, back.
I got my brother-in-law, he cut in on me, and I pressed the wrong button. That's the thing about cell phones.
That's the thing. That's all right. I just we could just carry on where you were, and we'll
edit
a little bit out.
Anyway, and so Johnny was coming and going. He was buying and selling all sorts of things, everything from camper trailers to instruments and anything he could, And he would pick them up in one place and drop them off in another. So he was a consummate businessman. And myself and the guitarist, we sold the bus to him for $1,900, and he sold it the next day in Stephenville for $2,300. The only thing is we had to drive it over from Gander. He paid for the gas too. I saw right away, for instance, that this guy was a businessman. I saw what he was doing, but it never really there was nothing in what he was doing which I was able to utilize at the point. But I recognized early in the game, for instance, having come from a rock band, 3 years of rock band, that he was a good businessman. But then I got called as we finished up the rock band that summer, I got called by a fellow whose name was George Burry, and George had a 4-piece band